So this is a slide from a 2008 presentation I gave to Canadian computer science students. And at the time, it was supposed to be funny, and the point of this slide was, this is a stage in your life where you should take incredible risks, because there's really no downside, and there's potentially all upside. And the moral of the story is, once you have something like this, you're not really going to be in a position to take incredible risks. And then a funny thing happened to me after that. So we had our first child, Henry, and then in early 2012, this happened to me. So then I realized I'm like halfway to that slide of 6 babies. Like, how does this happen to you, right? And this is the lady babies. They're really nice girls. They're about a year and a half now and super social, very nice girls. So if you don't know, I'm assuming most people in this room know Stack Overflow, so I'm just going to briefly cover. But this was my major project starting in about 2008. It was a partnership with Joel Spolsky, another sort of notable online development figure. And Stack Overflow was a Q&A engine, or is a Q&A engine for software developers and programmers. But we quickly realized that the engine was working unbelievably well, like maybe a little too well. And we should broaden the scope of the engine and see what other audiences it works with. So we launched some other sites using the same engine that you may or may not know about. And we called them the Star Wars trilogy. We started with Stack Overflow, which is, of course, Star Wars, the really big first thing that we did. And then Server Fault, which is the same engine for system administrators. And then Super User, which is for basically computer enthusiasts, people who love Macs, who love PCs, who love Linux, who love all things computer. And we call that the Stack Overflow trilogy. And we even have our Christmas special, which is Meta Stack Overflow. So this then eventually broadened into a whole network of Q&A sites on a variety of different topics outside the core group of geeks. And if you go to stackexchange.com, you can browse the network. You can see all the different topics that are on the network. And it's interesting, I was just looking at our stats, and all the rest of the network is as big as Stack Overflow now, which was very surprising to me, because Stack Overflow is unbelievably huge, surprisingly. But if you add up all the different Stack Exchange sites, collectively they are as big as Stack Overflow, which is great, because I didn't want to create an engine that only worked for programmers, because I love programming, I love programmers, but I like to think that I've built something that is useful to a wider audience than just programmers. And what we were doing here was playing what I call the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon game, where you start with any actor or actress, and you can eventually connect them to Kevin Bacon, right, through some connection of a person that's been in a movie, that was in a play, that was on a TV show, and Kevin Bacon was on that. So in this case, Kevin Bacon is programmers. So you start with programmers who are pilots, who are also cyclists. And eventually, you get to most topics that people would be interested in. And the thing that's important to realize about the Stack Exchange engine is that it's a really specific use case. It's not a generalized discussion engine. And they have this really great about page that they created after I left that I like a lot. If you go to stackoverflow.com/about, it will explain to you how the engine works, because it is very, very strict in the way that it works and what it will accept. And that's one of the reasons it works so well. And one thing I want to highlight here, and it's actually highlighted in yellow, is it says, this site is all about getting answers. It is not a discussion forum, and there is no chit-chat. This is not a place for people to hang out and talk about things. This is a place for people to get answers. And you always have this issue where people think, okay, discussion is getting answers, isn't it? And we found repeatedly on Stack Overflow that is actually not the case. Discussion is often the opposite of getting an answer to your question, which is counterintuitive to a lot of people. So you would say, but wait a minute, if you're going to have Q&A, if I ask a question, and then other people try to answer it, aren't we going to have a discussion? Isn't that a discussion? Doesn't getting an answer require some discussion? And I'll get to that. But first I want to give you guys a little bit of a joke. And I apologize if you've seen this before. It's one of my favorites. It's, how do you tell an introverted computer programmer from an extroverted computer programmer? The extroverted computer programmer looks at your shoes when he's talking to you. But no, wait, there's more, there's more. What do computer science students use for birth control? Does anyone know? Their personalities. I know, that one hits a little close to home, but the point I'm trying to make is that, sorry about that. But the funny thing is, we're not. I'm not known for my amazing personality. I didn't choose computers because I love interacting with people, and yet here I am. I'm building. All I do now is build engines where people talk to each other, and that made me wonder, how did I end up in that scenario? Because I was the introverted kid who, rather going to prom, was like sitting there on his Amiga trying to learn C, and I failed, by the way. So that was me. So how do you have these basically fundamentally not really social people building social software for the rest of the internet? How does that even work? How is that even possible, right? So you have introverts writing social software. So what could possibly go wrong in that scenario, right? And yet, Facebook. So, I mean, something's working here, right? So one problem we have on Stack Overflow that we didn't understand initially when we launched Stack Overflow was that these broad, soft questions tend to get a ton of attention versus the really detailed technical programming questions that were really the focus of why we built Stack Overflow were not as popular. And it's really another case of the bike shed syndrome, where it's more interesting, it's more entertaining, it's more accessible to more people to talk about what color something should be than the fundamental low-level deep design of something. So you're unavoidably going to get a lot of people that will tell you sort of their opinions about stuff, and aesthetic opinions at that. And there are certain questions that even invite this. So here's some examples where I've taken some of the programming terms and replaced, well, except for the bottom one, and replaced them with other stuff, just to illustrate the types of questions that are really bike shed questions. These are opinion questions. These are not detailed, specific questions, the type that we would want on Stack Overflow and Stack Exchange. And these are all sort of anti-pattern questions that we had to figure out later and eventually kind of disallow, because these are soliciting what? Opinions. And opinions don't work well on our engine, because you can't verify an opinion. I can't really vote up an opinion. Your opinion is not more correct than my opinion. It's just an opinion. It doesn't make it correct or incorrect. And these questions actually diminish the utility of the site, because it's fun to have these conversations. It's fun to talk about, what's your favorite, type of bicycle. But they diminish the utility of the other questions that are on the site. And when people see this, they want to do more of that. And the common response to this was, well, Jeff, you're just really strict about this stuff because we don't know why, but you're really strict. And why don't you just not look at these questions? Like, let other people look at them and just let them sit there on the site. But that doesn't really work, because if you are at a place where everybody is doing X, or you see tons of X, then X is the accepted behavior at that location. If you don't send the message that, wow, this is an okay question, but it's not really right for our site. If you're not sending that message of what's inappropriate on your site, you're saying it's appropriate. You're saying, please do more of this, right? No action doesn't work. No action sends the opposite message of what you want. And not only because of the broken windows problem of seeing broken windows leads to more broken windows, but it's also opportunity cost. If an expert Python developer comes to your site and gets drawn in by what's your favorite programming cartoon, spends a lot of time thinking about their favorite programming cartoon, reading about their favorite programming cartoon, that could be time that Python expert was spending helping other programmers get answers to their question, or getting an answer him or herself. So there's also an opportunity cost to this kind of entertainment. We even have, and we also have this on Discourse, by the way, this sort of just-in-time reminder. As you start typing, if you're a new user and you start typing into the answer box on Stack Overflow or Stack Exchange, we will remind you that you're really not here to have discussions. You're really not here to talk to the other people who answered. You're here to answer the damn question that is at the top of the page. And not only that, but we want you to provide evidence for your answer. Source code is evidence. I can compile source code. I can run source code, right? Or you can provide a web link. Look, I think you should do it this way because this blog explains why. That's acceptable as well. You gave a citation. You gave evidence to back up your answer. Can you really back up what you're saying here, or is it just because I said so? Because I said so is great when I'm a parent talking to my child, and actually, to be honest with you, because I said so doesn't work well on children either. But it's a terrible way to interact with other adults. You need to prove it. And science, it's weird because I didn't intend it this way, but we really started emphasizing the science part of computer science. I really think of software development is really more like a craft, to be honest with you, than actual science. But science in the sense of show me research, show me data, show me evidence. I really deeply believe in that, and the engine reflects that. Another anti-pattern we saw was people would come on a Stack Overflow and ask really broad questions that would require a ton of effort to sufficiently answer. And these broke down because it's asking people to do a ton of work. And people would say, well, why can't I ask this question, this really, really broad question? I want to ask it. Why can't I ask it? And you end up with this wall of text type of question. Like, who is going to read this and process this and actually answer this? This is not really a fun unit of work. So the answer we would give these people is, well, why don't you go read a book? There's still places for books. Stack Overflow does not replace computer science education. It really, really doesn't. It's complementary, highly complementary to the education that you're getting, I would hope, but it's not replaced knowing the fundamentals and knowing the background of all the stuff you're supposed to know. And that's what those kind of books and classes are good for. When you have a really detailed question that's specific, please come to Stack Overflow. And also, what research did you do before asking? If you haven't read any of the books that would give you the background necessary to even ask a good question, why are you here? Why didn't you do some research before asking, right? Like, we can't do all the work for you. What did you try to do? How did you attempt to solve this problem? Show me some web links where it shows me that you did research. If you're not going to do your homework before asking the question, why should we do work to help you? And is it even fair to ask us to come in and do some one-off question where it's like, I haven't even thought about this, just give me the answer? Is that fair? Is that a fair transaction for us? If we do work on your behalf and you've done nothing, is that fair? And also, if it's your question, you don't even care about your question enough to even research it, then that says this question doesn't matter. If you can't be bothered to research your own question at all, why should we care? So you've got to meet us halfway. If you're going to play this game with us, this Q&A game, you have to meet us halfway. Show us some effort, and we will show you some effort. That's how you have interactions with the community. So the pushback I got on this was, well, you know, Stack Overflow is so great. If you would just let me ask this one time, I don't have time to do research. I don't have, you know, this is a lot of work. You're asking me to do a lot of stuff. That's not really fair. You know, I'm kind of busy. And it never really occurs to people that the reason Stack Overflow works so well, the reason that people are there in the room in the first place, like on Stack Overflow, is because it produces these amazing, useful artifacts. Because we have these rules is why you're even here. So you're asking us to take away the rules that made this a good place for you to ask your question. So if we do that enough, eventually you're not going to want to come here at all. So we can't do that. We disallow drive-by questions for that reason, because it creates a place that people wouldn't want to go to. So, you know, Stack Overflow isn't the only place you can go to get your questions answered, and it shouldn't be the only place you go. We designed Stack Overflow to achieve a certain result. And if you don't like the way things work on Stack Overflow, there's a lot of other places you can go on the internet. Now, if you don't want to go to those other places because they're terrible, you might ask yourself, why is that? Why are these other places so terrible for my questions and Stack Overflow is so great? Could it be that the rules we have are there for a reason? I think maybe so, but that doesn't mean it's the only place to go. If you really object to the game we're playing at Stack Overflow, and it is kind of a game, it's a multiplayer game you're playing with these people to achieve a result, you can play a different game with other people. If you don't like Monopoly, you can play Risk, right? There's no rule against that. But that doesn't mean you have the right to change the rules of Monopoly either to make it match Risk. So one of my favorite Steve Jobs quote, this is my favorite for two reasons. One, because on the face of it, it's actually true. On Stack Overflow and Stack Exchange, we said, look, we're only doing Q&A. We're not doing discussion. We're doing one very specific thing here with a very strict set of rules. And we said no to all the other ways we could broaden the edge and have more discussion, because they would harm the underlying Q&A. This is also funny to me because it works on another level. This is a quote about iTunes. When iTunes was first being introduced, when Steve Jobs was talking to the music industry about iTunes, and they said, well, what if iTunes did this? What if iTunes did this? And Steve Jobs said, no, look. You're going to break this model. The way this is going to work is for us to simplify and say, look, we just do the core things with iTunes. And it's funny because if you've used iTunes today, it's this bloated, horrific, unbelievable mass of features that don't even make any sense with 5 kitchen sinks, right? So somewhere along the way, this kind of got lost at Apple. at least with regards to iTunes. So we do spend a lot of time in Stack Overflow and Stack Exchange saying no to our users. No, you can't do that. No, this is not the way we do things here. Now, we try to do it in a very nice educational way, but no is still no. And you will always have people that come to you and get angry with you because you said no to them. On the internet, no less, right? Who says no to people on the internet? This is the Wild West. We can do anything on the internet, right? Well, if you can't say no to your users, I think you have a problem. And again, in a nice educational way. And no, I'm never advocating rudeness because that's not what we do at Stack Overflow and Stack Exchange. But you have to be able to say no to some of the things your users want to do to keep them on track. So bike shedding, you know, again, the more general interest the question is, the better it will work. But the question is, what kind of popularity do you want? So now I've given you the same questions with actual programming terms. So you can see the specialization here of these bike shed questions recast as programming questions. These are questions that I'm ashamed to admit that we allowed on Stack Overflow because we didn't know what we were doing when we set this engine up. Because designing for emergent behaviors in a social environment, you know, with lots of different users, it's hard to predict the behaviors that will emerge. But these are all very much disallowed on Stack Overflow and Stack Exchange now. And the way we knew we had a problem initially was I was like, wow, this is interesting. We have all these great programming questions. It's working. The engine is working. This is in 2009 when we were, 2008, 2009 when we were starting. But I was like, wow, this is interesting. We have this question that has 400 answers. That's weird. What question can you ask that has 400 legitimate answers, right? That seems like something else. And it turned out it wasn't really a question. The minute you started having more than, I don't know, geez, even 15 answers is quite a lot. There's always more than one way to do it, but 15 different ways to do it. The threshold we used was 30, but it stops being a question and starts being something else, and that something else is a discussion. So I love this quote by Robert Scoble, who's a sort of a social media guy. I don't even know how to explain what he does if you know who he is. He's a great guy, but I don't know how to explain what he does. He spends a lot of time online. And he made the observation on FriendFeed, which I think got sold to Google, is that right? Anyway, FriendFeed's not around anymore. So it's kind of a funny Silicon Valley observation. But he noticed that the number of conversations you have is inversely proportional to how much you're learning. The more you're talking, the less you're learning. And I think he's right about that. And that was one of the key insights we had at Stack Overflow and Stack Exchange was you don't want that much discussion. You kind of want the minimum amount of discussion necessary to get the question to a good state and get the answers to a good state. So we still had the issue of like, look how popular this question is. It has 400 upvotes, and you're telling me this doesn't belong on your site? It is hugely popular with the community. How can you overrule the community? Popularity is the only metric that matters. But is it? I mean, if you even know who this is, and by the way, that's early duck face, I just noticed. Did you guys see that? Posh has given us the duck face. If popularity was the only metric that mattered, we would still be listening to the Spice Girls, right? Because they were popular, and therefore popularity is what matters, right? But you know, I think that's clearly untrue. I don't think popularity, in some cases, actually really works against you. You actually don't want the most popular questions because that implies they're so broad as to be not generally useful. Let me hold questions till the end. So we make it really hard to have discussions. Let me explain how the software does this. First of all, the answers are in vote order, right? So the chronology of answers is broken. You can have an answer at the top that came in 3 days ago and 5 answers at the bottom that came in weeks ago, right? Time doesn't matter. There's no way to reply to anything. There's no reply button. You can't reply to an answer. You can't reply to a comment. All you can do is add a comment and add an answer. That's all you can do, and add a question. We only allow one level of commenting, right? Like under a question and answer, there's one level. There's no hierarchy of reply to reply to reply. And comments themselves are very limited in length. Not Twitter limited, but limited. And you can only have a limited amount of formatting in comments. So comments are very much what we call second-class citizens in Stack Overflow. The primary unit of work is the question and the answer. The comments are there to support the questions and answers. They are not meant to be standalone and are not meant to be the reason you come to the site. So we allow the minimum discussion necessary to get great questions and great answers. So here's where I explain my biases. But I really believe, and again, based on what Google says, if you believe in Google as an arbiter of the internet, Stack Exchange pretty much dominates the search results. And I think it's because we designed it to produce the best possible information. We tried to maximize signal and minimize noise at a design level, right? But it only works for stuff that can be verified, that's based on data, that's based on fact, that's based on science, or at least based on a book of lore, because we do have a Christianity site. I want to be clear about that. A book of lore, you know, it's like religion is yeah. So, you know, Star Wars is basically religion with lasers, right? So what about the sites that aren't really data and fact and science based? So here, if you go to stackexchange.com and you click on the sites directory, which you can do, scroll down to the bottom because it's sorted by activity. The sites that are not getting a lot of activity, these are all launched by the community. So the way things are launched on Stack Overflow and Stack Exchange is there's this site called Area 51 where people can say, hey, I wish there was a Q&A site on, you know, whatever topic comes to mind, kites. And if enough people support that site from the network, it will then get created. So these were created by the community, not by us. And again, I'm not at Stack Exchange, but we don't say, hey, there should be a poker site. The community said there should be a poker site. But you'll notice the poker site is doing very, very badly. It's not popular. It doesn't have a lot of questions. It doesn't have a lot of activity, and it's a year old. Lego is the same way. So you might wonder, why are these sites failing so badly? And it's okay to fail because these sites are experiments where we community launch the sites. Some of them make it, some of them don't. They have to go through a beta period. They go through an evaluation period. We don't want to put bad information on the internet, so eventually we pull the stuff back if it's not working. So if you think about why these sites are failing, and Lego and poker are my two favorite examples. So think about the kinds of things you would want to ask people on the Lego site. You know, look at this cool Lego thing I built. It's amazing, just look at it, right? Not allowed on Stack Overflow. You can't say, look at this cool code I wrote. Nobody can say that. You might want to buy and sell rare Lego kits. There's some really cool stuff in the Lego universe that's hard to get. You might want to share just a Lego story with the community. You might want to say, geez, I'm having trouble building this thing in Lego. What are some methods of building this thing in Lego? Like, where do I get Lego, right? Where's a good place to get like sort of cheap Lego sets? And you just basically want to hang out and talk Lego with people that love Lego. It's not really about data, fact, and science. And that brings me to Discourse, which is the project I took on after Stack Overflow. Because as great as the Stack Exchange engine is, it is a bad map to a lot of topics that people want to talk about on the internet because they're not data, fact, and science based. That doesn't make them wrong. It just means there's not a good fit for that engine. The other reason is because forum software is just really, really terrible. I would have startups come to me and ask me, you know, give me advice about this thing that I've built. And the first thing I would say to them is, well, why are you asking me what I think of what you've built? Why don't you ask the people that are using this thing that you've built what they think of what you've built? And they would say, great idea. We need a place to talk to our community. And they would say, recommend software that we can use so we can talk to the community of people that use our thing. And I always had to play sad trombone in my mind at that point because none of the forum software I felt good about recommending to them because it's really, really bad software. So I wanted to give them something that wasn't terrible to use because I believe in getting feedback from community. I believe deeply in this. And it was kind of fun too because I got to change sides. I spent the last 4 years from 2008 to 2012 saying, no, you can't do this. No, we have these strict rules. Let me explain my rule set to you. Here's why we have rules. I got really tired of explaining this to people over and over. And I thought, geez, what would it feel like if I changed sides? If I said, you know what? Yes, we love random discussion. Random discussion is the reason we're all in this room. Let's just all have discussions. So if you thought of Stack Overflow as the X-Wing in Star Wars, right? I thought, well, hey, what if I built a TIE fighter, right? The evil empire of discussion that I've spent so much time railing against for the last 4 years. You know, I was like, hey, what would it feel like to change sides and say, you know what, discussion is really great. I love discussion. You know, and the emperor was pleased because people love discussion. People are very, very social animals, and there's nothing really wrong with that. But it's kind of the dark side. in terms of discussions are easy to have. It's easy to discuss what color something should be. But it's hard to have a deep discussion about Java internals. These are very different things. So you can't use the same engine for those two things. So this is a picture of Discourse. This is our first partner, How To Geek. And you can see that hopefully it's recognizably forum software. It doesn't look like Google Wave, for example, which is, I can't even understand what Google Wave, still don't really understand what Google Wave was. It should look like a forum. We don't want to look like a flying car from the future that you can't recognize. So here's me drilling into an actual topic. And again, it's paragraphs of text with a username and a date, right? But it's a clean design. It's modern software. It's open source. You know, it's free. So the cost for this, the cost. Now, this may or may not matter to you because it depends what the purpose is. Like, why are you in this room right now? You're in this room right now because ostensibly you hope to learn something from this talk. Now, I have a secondary goal. I do actually want to entertain you because I find that entertainment helps people learn. But if you came into this room just to be entertained, you would have different expectations from this talk, right? Like, I'm not nearly entertaining enough to be a pure entertainment exercise. So the efficiency goes down. So the thought experiment I want you guys to think about is, when was the last time you were doing a search for something on Google and you got a chat log as a search result? That actually helped you. That wasn't random. Can you raise your hand if anyone got a chat log search result in the last month? 1, 2. That's good. But that's tiny. That's my point, right? Now compare that mentally with the last time you got a search result that hit a forum, okay, or a blog, or a Facebook, or a Twitter, or of course Stack Exchange. And I think you'll find my personal estimate was when I search for stuff, I really, really rarely get chat log search results. Forums are somewhat common. I get about at least 1 a week, if not more. Blogs are pretty common, and then Stack Exchange is very common in my search results. So what went down is utility and efficiency. So if your goal was to produce useful artifacts on the internet, then you really shouldn't be on a forum. If your goal is to produce, just an entertaining social use of your time, then it's fine to be on a forum because that's the expectation that you've set up. So on Stack Exchange, for every page that we produce, we would have to say, is this a useful page to put on the internet, yes or no? And if it's not a useful page on the internet, then we want it not to be a part of our network. It doesn't have to disappear from the world, but we don't want it on our network, okay? Whereas with Discourse, the only guideline is this illegal to put on the internet, right? So that's a much, much broader guideline, right? Much easier to meet the is this illegal rule than is this useful. Because first of all, how do you quantify useful? There's a certain amount of editorial sort of oversight we're doing on Stack Overflow and Stack Exchange to say we measure utility. And your question, although it's useful to you, is not useful to anyone else, okay? And that matters to us. It needs to help more than just you. And if we can't say, in good faith, it helps 10 people, 100 people, then that question needs to go away. The only way we do that on Discourse is the only way we pull things from Discourse is because they're illegal. So where Stack Exchange was a system of me saying, well, not me, but the engine saying no to people, for good reason, right? Because this strictness, this discipline is necessary to get useful artifacts, right? Just like, everybody sitting in this room, if you guys all started to suddenly have conversations with each other, that wouldn't be, first of all, wouldn't be respectful to the speaker and all that stuff, but it wouldn't be conducive to having a presentation, right? It wouldn't be conducive to learning. So it's strongly curated and moderated. Whereas Discourse is a system of yes, where whatever you want to do, you can do it on Discourse. If you want to have a conversation that's radically off topic, that's fine, as long as it's accepted by the community that you're on. So it's much more social, much more engaging, much more like a party where you're having fun, but the cost is the efficiency of the information that you're generating goes way, way down. But it doesn't go to zero. One reason I like the Discourse project is because I regularly get forum search results still. And I think forums regularly produce good search artifacts, just at a much, much lower rate than Stack Overflow and Stack Exchange. And that's okay because that's the contract that we signed up for. We're here to be social. It's not a primary goal for us to generate useful artifacts. The other problem with Stack Exchange is I can't give it to you because it's not open source. If you want the Stack Exchange engine, I'm sorry. There's clones of it out there of varying quality, but I can't give it to you. And even if I could give it to you, I doubt you could make it work because it requires a very, very strict set of rules that you have to adhere to, and the community has to understand and embrace. The way we do this on Stack Exchange is every launch site was approved by other members of the Stack Exchange network that understand why we have the rules that we have, right? You won't have an influx of users who have never seen Stack Overflow or Stack Exchange, have no idea why we have these rules, and start trying to have discussions in our engine that's not built for discussion. It's built for highly directed questions and answers that are about data, fact, and science. So Discourse, on the other hand, is really what I call a system of rainbows, meaning it works for everyone because there really are no rules other than, do you like these people that you're talking to? Yes or no? And we provide tools to make sure that they are people that will be civil to you as well. But it has very, very few rules, and it's a fundamental building block of, I think, almost all online community. So the reason we made it open source is because I believe that's the only way for this to survive. The only way for a system like this to survive is to establish an ecosystem like WordPress established, where you say, look, we're giving it away, it's free, and eventually we have hosting, we have services, we sell themes, people build Discourse plugins, but you let 1 million open source discussions bloom. And this makes the web better. So selfishly, I'm still going to be happy with any outcome because I want to end up on pages on the internet that I like. And I like Discourse forums because they're well designed, they're fast, and they give you tools to keep the evil people out of the system. So speaking of those tools to keep evil people out of the system, what about voting? This is the first thing that came up when I talked about, hey, I just built Stack Overflow and Stack Exchange. I would really like to build a forum system that I would like to use. And they would say, wait a minute, are you going to have voting? Because voting is a huge part of Stack Overflow and Stack Exchange. And I said, well, no, you can't really have voting. Because how do I vote on your opinion? How does your opinion more correct than someone else's opinion? Because forums are largely systems of opinion. They're not about data, fact, and science. They're about socializing and sharing opinions. So your opinion about who is the coolest X-Man is not more valid than mine, even though it's obviously Wolverine. I mean, come on. Wolverine is clearly the coolest X-Man. There is a trust system, though. So Discourse does have a system of trust, meaning we learn to trust certain users in the community and weight their activity in the system a little bit more. And eventually, they start to accrete moderator-like capabilities if they get enough trust in our system. And the reason I built it this way is because a forum system has to be moderated by the people that are most active in the forum, that are consistently there day in, day out, that know the lore of your community. The way I've seen communities really fail online is when they appoint a moderator and the moderator doesn't show up, either doesn't care, doesn't know how to do their job, or is otherwise unavailable. These communities eventually explode because they have no way of self-regulating. And that's what we want to avoid with Discourse. Now you might say, well, Jeff, what about post counts? Because I notice on every forum I go to, well, a lot of forums I go to, there's a little number next to my name, and it's post count, the number of times I have posted on the forum. So clearly, the way to measure success in a forum is by posting a lot, right? And I would say no, that's actually not true. In fact, what we've found is that reading is fundamental. The most avid members of your community, the people that know the lore, are the ones who read everything on the forum. Reading is much more important than speaking. And you would think this makes sense because the conversations that you have where one person is just nonstop talking, are those good conversations? I mean, conversations are about talking and listening. And ideally, really, an emphasis on the listening part. So the people who aren't reading the content on the forum are not listening to the community. So reading is really heavily weighted in our system. And the way you move up trust levels, this is a screenshot from a 2001 book called Building Web Communities, which is ancient internet years. But you have a natural progression of people that come to your site, starting with, of course, visitors that just are like, what is this? I've come here and I don't even know what this is. They might participate a little bit, make their way up to novice. If they show up every day for a couple weeks, hey, they're a regular, right? And then if they're there for a year, if they're there for a very, very long time and show a participation pattern that's consistent over a year, then they become one of the leaders of your community. So the way you get to trust level 1 on Discourse is really, really simple. You start off as a new user and you're really sandbox. You can't do stuff like post images. You can only post 2 links. We hide functionality in the system from you to keep it simple for you so that it's not confusing or overwhelming. So it works on both dimensions in terms of simplification and also, hey, we don't really trust you yet because we don't know you yet. You're a stranger that walked up to us on the street. It's like, I don't know, you might be cool, but I got to evaluate you a little bit to see the cut of your jib, right? I don't know who you are. So the way you get to trust level 1 is it's pretty simple, but we found this to be very powerful. You have to enter 5 topics, read at least 50 posts, and here's the kicker, spend 15 minutes reading posts. Now, all 3 of these things have to be true. So we measure in Discourse all the time that people spend reading posts. We can tell you for any given post on Discourse how much time that was on the screen of every user who has ever looked at it. Because that's how much we value reading in our system. So trust level 2. Now we've only actually implemented up to trust level 2. We have, you can go on Meta and you can read about trust level 3. We haven't implemented it yet. But for trust level 2, you can see the requirements go up, but it's more about like regular participation, much more time spent reading, and really the big one for me is visiting 15 days. You've shown a pattern of willingness to come back to the site and actually engage with the community, right? And all of these things have to be true. You have to reply, you have to like. Some core actions have to be taken. And it's really interesting on Discourse. You guys can install Discourse anytime and play with it, but in the admin panel, it'll show you for any given user like very detailed stats of read time, all the stuff you're seeing here because we're tracking it user by user. So when I mentioned that the only thing that was disallowed on Discourse was illegal content, that's true. But the other thing that we try to help people understand when they install forum software is you have to treat each other with respect. Like communities that aren't based on some form of basic respect for other users are destined to fail. And I was always really disappointed that forum software did nothing to help people understand this. They would spend all this time explaining, how do I make things bold? How do I create a new topic? You know, mechanical things about the software that just are not hard to understand and learn, whereas they did nothing to help people understand, like, how do we actually respect each other? How do I push trolls out of my community? How do I enforce good behaviors on my community? Because communities where people don't treat each other with respect eventually break apart. And what I'm quoting here is actually a forum post from, this is a forum that I've been on for 10 years. And eventually they had a big schism where they split because the moderator, they felt, was not doing his job. I know this guy. I mean, I haven't met him in real life, but I've known him. And I can't really get him to understand this. But he wrote this great post explaining about the norms of behavior on his site are not about the quality of the information that you contribute, but about its tone. If you can't express your opinion in a civil way, you need to go away. And it's a reasonable expectation to have arguments, to have spats, to have fights, but that you have to treat each other like some level of friendship. And there's no discussion of this in software. So whereas on Stack Exchange, we would say, look, you have to be civil to each other. You don't have to be nice. I don't even expect that. I don't even want that to be honest. I want you to be honest with me. I mean, if my code is broken, if I'm telling you that vaccines cause autism, I don't want you to be nice to me. I want you to say, look, I think you're wrong. Here's the data. That you have no data to support your position, right? That's what I want you to say to that person. You don't have to be nice. You have to be civil, right? Either the data and science is there to support what you're saying, or it isn't. Now, in Discourse, we don't have data, facts, and science. We have opinions. So how do you deal with that? The answer is kindness. You can say whatever you want to say. You can express any opinion you want to hold, but you have to do it in a way that's kind to other users, okay? That's how you will be judged. So going back to popularity, so this could be an answer to a Java question on Stack Overflow. But what problem does this really solve for you? right? What situation would you be in where you need this code, right? I mean, I guess if you're James Bond, you might need this code. So popularity is no longer the enemy, whereas popularity is kind of the enemy on Stack Overflow. This is too popular because it's there for the wrong reasons. It appeals to too many people. It doesn't really solve any problems. It's entertainment, which is hugely popular, right? People love to be entertained, but that's not what we do at Stack Overflow and Stack Exchange. So the enemy at Discourse is cruelty. It's trolling, right? These are the things that are the enemy that we actively fight against, that we build the software to have protection against, to have an immune system that comes from the community to help push those behaviors out. And by that, I mean push the people out that engage in those sort of behaviors. Now, the secondary problem that we have that I think is endemic to all forum software is being off topic. Now, off topic conversations naturally meander a little bit, and that's normal and that's expected. But if your conversations go too far off topic, what we can do is this button, reply as new topic, is here on the right gutter all the time. So at any given time, you can basically branch the conversation. Say, oh, hey, this is interesting, but I want to talk about this related thing. We give you a button that says, look, do this, and it will, notice how it attaches the conversation, so they're attached to each other both bidirectionally, okay? So that you don't click on a topic that says, let's discuss dogs versus cats, and end up with a long diatribe against, George W. Bush, because that is not what I signed up for when I clicked on a topic titled dogs versus cats, right? So spam. This is an actual spam that came through on, I think, Boing Boing is our other partner at the moment. So here's some spam. And you might ask, well, Jeff, how do these tools work? I mean, you're talking about tools for enforcing norms. Like, this is evil behavior that I want to push out of the community, right? Spam. It does require some action on the part of the users. This flag button is only available to people we trust a little. Okay, you can't come into a new community and just start flagging because we don't know you. You're just a stranger that walked up to us on the street. We don't know you yet. So clicking on flag, which here, zooming in, sorry, so you can actually see it, brings up a flag dialog. And this actually tries to teach you what this dialog is about. Like this is an educational part of the system where we say, look, you've clicked on a button. Now we're going to try to teach you what that button does, okay? And it teaches you the norms and the behaviors, like what things are wrong in our community that I would flag about. And of course, off topic is there, inappropriate, spam, which is this, and then some notifications where you want to actually talk to the user or you want to talk to a moderator about this post. So we're trying to make it easy for the community to do the right thing and say, hey, look, I see behavior here that I don't think is acceptable, right? And my philosophy has always been, put a trash can on every street corner. If you put a trash can on every street corner, enough people will pick up trash and put it in the trash can that you will eventually have clean streets. It's all about making it easy to do the right thing. Whereas this happens to me actually all the time. I'll be on a playground with my son and my daughters, and I'll see trash. And I was like, I want to pick up this trash because I don't like a dirty playground for my children to play in. And I pick it up and I look and I'm like, where's the nearest trash can? And if it's way, way over there, then all of a sudden I feel a lot less incentivized to take this piece of trash and put it in the trash. So make it easy to do the right thing. And there's also a corollary to that, which is make it hard to do the wrong thing, which I talked about when I said we suppress discussion on Stack Overflow. You can have discussions there, but it's a pain in the ass, right? That's very intentional. It's difficult to have discussions on Stack Overflow because we don't want you to. You can do it. So what happens when something gets flagged? So this is an aspect of the system that we want to be self-healing, where say somebody just goes over the line. Say it's not spam, in which case you just push it out of the system. It's usually pretty straightforward. But it's something where somebody just went over the line with a personal attack or something that really you're uncomfortable with. Well, if it gets flagged enough, that person gets a very nicely worded message from the system, right? In this case, the system is Geek, who's the host of the site. And says, look, the community really found your post sort of not acceptable. Can you see fit to change your post to improve it? Okay? So the user, and this is a private channel. This is a private message. You can't see because the icon is hidden. This is a private message that goes out to the user. It's a private channel. It's not done in public because we found that doing things in public creates an aspect of shame, okay, which I don't mind so much on data, fact, and science because, again, it's about facts. They're either correct or incorrect. They can be verified. Opinions, it's not really wrong to hold these opinions. So you don't want people to feel shamed. So it's a private channel. You give them the opportunity to fix the post. If they go in and edit the post, there's a certain timeout, like a cool down period, like 10 minutes, where they have to wait. They can then edit the post, and then it's unhidden. Okay, so if enough flags cause something to be hidden, the user is notified with what you're seeing here. Then if that user goes in and edits the post, it is then unhidden. Okay? And then if it's not flagged any further, it's a trust adjustment for that user because now we trust them more. We're like, oh, you stepped over the line, but you fixed it. And I've actually seen this work. We have, I don't know if you guys have heard of this thing, Soylent. It's very, very geeky. It's this idea that you don't want to eat food anymore, so you have a liquid meal that you eat for every meal of the day. It's Soylent.me. They're powered by a Discourse forum. And I was engaging a little bit in that community, even though I don't really plan to eat Soylent. I thought it was an interesting concept, and I was engaging a little bit with the community. And I got a reply that was just way over the line from somebody. I don't even remember the context, but I was like, what is wrong with this guy? So I flagged it, and it met the threshold. The guy got this message, and he went in and fixed his post all by himself. The community was self-healing, right? No moderator was present for that to happen because I'm not really a moderator at the Soylent community. So these are the kind of self-healing behaviors that we want to encourage in the community. And the community has to decide what their norms are and how their norms work. Now, there's a lot of complexity to this. If you're a programmer, you're thinking, okay, what are the different cases I can get into here? What if the person doesn't edit? What if they edit and it's reflagged? There's a detailed post on Meta that explains all the ways that stuff works. It can get pretty hairy. But it is self-healing, and it's basically automatic. So Discourse is just a baby. We launched on February 5th of this year. We're not at version 1.0. We're about to launch our third partner early this month. And WordPress, again, is our spirit animal. We really want to do for forums what WordPress did for blogs. And I had a lot of conversations about forums leading up to this project where I would just talk to people about forums. How do you feel about forums? Tell me forums you participate on. What do you like about forums? What don't you like about forums? And one thing nobody ever said to me ever was, I love forums. I can't get enough forums. Like nobody had anything positive to say about the state of forums online. And I found that a little bit depressing because I love online community. And forum software, probably the essential building block of all online community, is universally loathed. And Discourse really sets out to change that. So if someone says to you, hey, I need a place for my community to hang out, just like if someone said to you, hey, I want a web page where I can post my opinions and thoughts and feelings on the world, you would say, well, go to WordPress. Go to WordPress, they'll host you, you can get the software for free. So if someone makes that same assertion to you and says, I want a community where people can talk to each other, you can say, hey, there's a really great open source option, it's called Discourse. And it really works, and it's free. And I'm a huge fan of Clay Shirky, and I really recommend every book he's written. If you haven't read them, please read them. He's a great, great thinker about the internet. One of the great professional highlights of my life is I got to give a presentation with Clay Shirky in 2009 that was excellent. And one of his big points was that the internet empowers people without money to change things about the world. And I want Discourse to be a part of that, where people could say, hey, I created a Discourse community, a bunch of people came together, and we actually formed a community, and were able to change things in our little corner of the world. So Discourse is basically love, internet style. And that's all I have. Thank you very much. And I will definitely open it up to questions now. Yes.
It's interesting. So I really enjoyed hearing that talk, and I enjoyed the contrast between Q&A forums and discussion forums. Some things feel to me as though they fall in between, and I wonder what your thoughts are. For instance, I work a lot on MOOC platforms, right? So these are these free online courses. You have tons of people taking a course, typically semi-synchronously. They're going through the material at roughly the same time. They use these so-called discussion forums on the platforms to talk about the course material. There's a little bit of chatter. There's a little bit of let's learn from each other by discussing our opinions, but let's not get too off topic. What's your take? Is that more like Q&A or more like discussion forum?
Most communities tend towards free-form discussion. One of the cool things about forums is that they are very adaptable. You can have what we call topics or threads in some forums. Some topics can be Q&A, and other topics could be just free-form discussion. So it's possible to have a mixture. We don't support that at this time yet because we're really focusing on do one thing, which is discussion, do it really, really well. But we've always understood that there are very common, what we call archetypes. Q&A is definitely one of them. Buying and selling things is very, very huge. There are these sneaker forums that are unbelievably trafficked. You would not, I had no idea some of this stuff existed. There's apparently this knife forum that's like invite only that you have to pay to enter, and like everybody who sells knives is there. So there's buying and selling, there's Q&A, there's polls are huge. You know, just polling, like what's the best way to do X, what's the best place to get a hamburger around here. We want to support that on a topic level. So when you start a new topic, you say, hey, this is a Q&A topic, right? And there's an answer, and I can say this is the best answer, that sort of thing. So a lot of communities are sort of a mixture. But I would say that the most communities that I see tend towards free-form discussion, most of all. But we want to support all those models, buying and selling, polls, Q&A, all those things. Definitely, if you visit a lot of forums, like we did a lot of research leading into this, you see a lot of patterns like that. And we want to get to that. Yep. Yes, in the back.
So what I was really struck by with your talk is whenever I think about, especially coding horror, your blog, all the technical writing that you have, and during this talk, we talked a lot about building communities. And I was curious what resources you would recommend, or what experiences you've had that are non-technical that have really informed you to make those community decisions and figure out this is how you structure community to achieve these certain goals.
Well, I think Clay Shirky, as I mentioned at the end, is very, very influential to me in terms of the way he looks at communities. I also like to do research. Like when I started StackOverflow, I sat down and said, okay, we're doing a Q&A site. I need to go look at all the other Q&A sites on the internet and see how they work. And I found that there were these huge Q&A sites I'd never heard of, like AnswerBag. And if you looked them up, like their stats were huge. These were big, big sites on the internet. Of course, there's Yahoo Answers, the butt of so many jokes. But I would say really just do your research. Like look at, and don't look at just the big ones like Facebook. Look at the things that came before Facebook. Look at the history. Look at how those sites work. Look at the peers of Facebook, maybe not even in English. I would say, do the research and really look at how we got to where we are. Don't just look at the winners. Look at the losers too, because sometimes the losers have really interesting ideas that just didn't quite pan out, but they were really onto something. And then they zigged when they could have zagged, and then they lost. So I would say, rather than one sort of, other than Clay Shirky, who's fantastic and a great resource for this, is just the research of there's this huge spectrum of activity on the internet. And people call forums the dark matter of the internet, the B movies, the underbelly, right? Like the people don't really look at, but there's so many forums out there that have so much traffic. And just the way they're used are sometimes very bizarre. Like on Something Awful, they have topics that have tens, hundreds of thousands of posts that have started in 2003. That's a very strange way to use forum software, but that's the norm there. So I think understanding the patterns of what's out there and how we got here is really interesting, and will already set you apart from most people that attack these kind of problems. They don't bother to do any research, actually. Yeah. Yes?
So I was really struck by your use of the word kindness when you talked about discourse and how that's kind of the guiding principle. So we have an online forum for younger users between high school and college primarily, and a lot of the focus is on help. It's kind of a peer-to-peer help. And when it works well because of altruism and all these good things. When it doesn't work well, that's when you get all these trolls, and now we're sort of at the point where we're trying to figure out how to deal with that. Because our popularity is coming back to kill us. We get over 1 million uniques a month. These are 1 million random people that are coming to the system, and not everyone buys the Kool-Aid or buys this whole principle. So how do you deal with numbers like that, and how do you grow the kindness?
Well, the only thing that scales with a large community is the community itself. No matter how many moderators you throw at this problem, they're going to be overwhelmed. So I think there's two things. One is giving users a trash can on every street corner. Look, I see a piece of trash. Oh, I see a trash can. What's the next logical thing to do? If it's close and it's nearby, I can do that, right? That's step one, is give them the tools. Give them a trash can on every corner. Do the right thing, which is flagging, which I talked about. And the second is really a cultural thing of you do have to have experienced users leading the inexperienced users. You cannot have the blind leading the blind. This is why if I gave people Stack Exchange, it wouldn't work because they need the experienced users to teach the younger users, look, these are the norms we have here, and let me teach you about it in a nice way, right? Like not saying no necessarily, but look, let me show you how to do this. Here's what we do when we see rudeness, and it has to be publicly visible. The sense of justice has to be visible. If it's invisible justice, then it doesn't look like there's any justice at all. It just doesn't appear at all. So there's a certain educational aspect to sort of showing that there was some bad behavior here, but it was okay, we cleaned it up, right? All good. And they think, oh, that's the kind of place where I see bad behavior, stuff will happen, and it'll get fixed, right? And then I feel better about the community. So I guess really 3 things. Now, unfortunately, these are deep problems. Now, we're attacking them with discourse in a variety of ways, but I think in your case, I would really rely on your more experienced users, just kind of bring them into the fold and see what kind of tools you can give them to help the other users sort of understand the mission and how to be kind to each other. And that's what we do here. We're kind to each other. We're not rude. We're not mean. We're actually kind to each other. Yeah. Yes?
So what's the key point you think we should consider when we're designing the future forum?
Say again.
Do you think there are some points or deep insights that we have to take into consideration when we're designing future forum? Like, the forum right now, people are thinking is now that people don't have lots of positive feedback.
Oh, so basically how to fix existing forum software. Well, forum, it's difficult to change this space because communities change slowly. If you have an established community and I walk up to them and say, hey, you guys are going to switch to Discourse, they would revolt. And I think rightfully so because it's a big change for them to absorb. I mean, it's a pretty radical change, right? We didn't build Google Wave, but it's different enough from what they're used to that they would reject it outright. So that's the #1 problem in the forum space is really how do you get large communities to overcome their inertia and actually change the software that they've on because they start to love this terrible software. Like, this is how we've always done things and it's always been terrible and that's why I love it here because it's so terrible, right? That's actually a thing that they will say to you. And you're like, you're crazy. And it's like, that's the way communities are. So I'm a little pessimistic about change to existing communities. For new communities, that's where we really pitch Discourse. Look, you don't have a community yet, but you have a Kickstarter where a bunch of people want to talk to each other. Use Discourse. If you have a bunch of people at the top that are very dissatisfied with the status quo, they can push through a big change like that and essentially tell the community, look, we're changing. This is for the good of all. Here's the rationale. But look, either come with us or don't come with us because we're going to do this thing. But what doesn't work is leaving it in the hands of the community itself. In terms of changing just the culture without the software. I'm really talking about changing the software at this point. Changing the culture essentially is the same answer I gave you, which is the experienced users have to lead the inexperienced users. And unfortunately, this existing forum software gives them terrible tools to do this, right? All they can really do is reply to everything. So that kind of change is really challenging. And it's unfortunate for us too, because I never had the idea that I would wake up tomorrow and everything would be Discourse. I've never harbored that illusion because that's crazy. But even then, I thought of this as a 2-year mission to get traction. And now I'm thinking of it more as like a 5-year mission because it's just so hard to affect change in these large communities. So it takes a lot of time is what I'm saying. And you have to be very, very patient. Yes?
I'm trying to understand a little bit how communities break down after they've been well established. Like I've been on a couple forums where that's happened. It sounds like you have too.
Definitely.
And so I'm wondering if you've noticed any qualitative markers that go beyond just increased rudeness.
I think the breaking point I think is when you see topics started where there's just outright revolt. This forum is broken. I'm leaving. Everybody should come with me. And I see that sometimes at the individual user level. We had one user that was PMing another user about, it's hard to explain, but yeah, just outright revolt. There's usually one or several topics that are sort of symptomatic of a break that's about to happen.
But as a diagnostic, be able to predict that the community is going off the rails.
Well, I think that comes from the sense of powerlessness, right? Like, there's something wrong with this community, and I can't do anything about it. And I love this community, and that's super frustrating. I love this community, and I can't change. I have no power, none, right, to affect change in this community. I mean, even just the ability to flag stuff, and again, growing through trust levels. At trust level 3, for example, you can rename topics. not in yet, but coming soon. You can rename topics, you can recategorize, because we trust you enough to say, look, you need to help the new users who suck at creating topic titles. And believe me, do people suck at creating topic titles. The experienced users can create better topic titles, so when you click on it, you actually know what you're going to get, which is always nice, and recategorize things. So you feel empowered, right? Because you are empowered. You can now do things that previously only a moderator could do. Your flags carry more weight. When you flag something, it's much more likely to go into that nether zone of going hidden, right? Because we trust you more. So you now have power. And then longer term for Discourse, we have not done this yet, but I want to have a moderator election system where you could call for election, say, look, this is bullshit, what's going on? I want a new election, I want new leadership, right? You could actually do that within the software, right? No forum software does this. I mean, we don't do it yet, but it's something we're thinking about. So my hope is that once you have agency within the forum, you won't feel like you need to make a break. You're like, I can change the system from within, right? This is the way government is supposed to work. It doesn't always work that way, but you shouldn't have a revolution every time there's a problem in the government. You should, get elected to office and help change it yourself, or vote for someone who will, right? Why can't these systems work more like democratic systems? Yes?
So I was just wondering, what are the key considerations when designing those forums, specifically designing the identity or profile for those users, like how respectful they are, how kind they are, or how much they know about this topic, things like that. What are the considerations and what are the design principles for designing a profile?
I think it starts with the topic. So the way you create a forum the way you create a successful forum is be famous, because you can attract an audience. So first of all, it's about attracting an audience for the right reason. Like one advantage that I had with my partner Joel Spolsky is we had these big programming audiences. So when we launched StackOverflow, it was, look, there's this new thing. We could point our existing large audiences at it, and the engine was designed for that audience, right? It was designed for programmers. So it's a great audience. We're famous within our respective niches for small values of famous. And we design the engines specifically for them. So I think with a forum, first of all, you're dealing with broader software. You can't say this was designed for you. This is just forum software. It's for people to talk to each other. And then how do you get people to show up, right? There have to be seeding communities, I think is the interesting problem of there has to be, do you want to show up to a ghost town? It's like, oh, look, I clicked on the site and it's empty. Well, that's not a fun party. That's like being the first person to arrive at the party. It's like, hey, I'm at a party and I'm the only person here. So you have to make it look like a party from the get-go. You have to create and synthesize topics. There's a bunch of stories of the Reddit guys created a bunch of, they would submit links all the time, seed their own system, right? So I think seeding of the system is really important and very critical. If you're launching a small community, there has to be some nucleus of content there for them to sink their teeth into and want to respond to, right? Oh, this is an interesting topic. Let me reply to that, right? That, I think, is the real big design consideration. It's not so much the profile pages, it's about the content and the topic. That's what's bringing people there, and the conversations. And if other interesting people are there, like, wow, Joe responded. I love Joe. Let me talk to Joe, right? So I think that's the way to think of this, is just the initial seeding, and you have to be kind of clever about how you do that. Or famous is the shortcut to being clever. Yeah, it's always true, unfortunately. Yes?
How do you feel about anonymity in online discussions?
I have mixed feelings about it because, first of all, we support, we don't require you to use your real name anyway. There's 2 names in Discourse, the short, basically Twitter-style name, which is 15 characters and also ASCII. And then your longer name, which is Unicode and can be spaces, all that good stuff. So you don't have to provide a full name. You could just be a handle. I view that as pretty sufficient anonymity, but people on Meta have asked for a mode, kind of like Quora has, which I didn't really like it on Quora, but they have all these sex questions on Quora, which are a disaster. But and you could enter anonymous mode and then ask your sex question or whatever. I mean, that's a legitimate use case. I'm just hard-pressed to think of communities I actually want to go to that have this functionality. But I acknowledge the need, and certainly say you have, I don't know, I can understand the rationale, but my big stumbling block with it is show me the community where people regularly post in an anonymous mode that you go to regularly. I need to see examples of where this is really working to believe in it. I'm not against it by any means. I have yet to see a really compelling example of this working. And I've seen many counterexamples of it not working.
required to post with your real name, you might get.
The real name thing is very misguided. I don't think that works the way the people who think it works want it to work. I do not believe in enforcing people like Google Plus is jerks about this, right? Like you have to have, the URL has to be your real name, and there's just no good that can come of this policy, in my opinion. Like I've just heard, again, and seen many horror stories of it not working and people being all angry about it, and for no good reason, right? Like, what difference does it make if you're Scrooge McDuck or your real name? Who cares? What matters to me is what you actually post. Are you being kind to the other users? Are you contributing, interesting conversations? That is what I care about. I don't care about your actual name. And Discourse doesn't really either. Discourse is going to reflect that philosophy. So, not against it, but I need to see compelling examples of it working. I've yet to really have someone give me that. Yes?
Yeah, how you doing? I work with news content, and I was wondering what your thoughts are on sort of community-generated news content, where on the one hand it's a little bit like the StackOverflow model, in that there needs to be verification, corroboration of information. It's key because it's actionable information. On the other hand, the answer might very well be a discourse where there's multiple points of view and there isn't a singular right answer. What's your and also like the timeliness, the recency aspect of news is so critical. So any thoughts on that?
Well, I do have some thoughts on that. So at Boing Boing, we have a forum at Boing Boing, and Boing Boing will occasionally post stuff about current news events, like the Trayvon Martin thing. And I grew to really loathe and fear Trayvon Martin topics because they always played out the same way. And there were always the same arguments made, and it was just very exhausting, basically. So I appreciate that with news, for current events type stuff, it can be really challenging to have public, especially public, even within the Boing Boing community, which is not the greater public, it was really challenging. So I totally understand, because you'll get, man, there's just some really strong opinions, right? Very strong opinions about people dying. And people get really worked up about this stuff. And I think rightly so. These are important issues that need to be discussed. But the question is, again, are people being civil to each other? Would you want to read this discussion as a bunch of angry people yelling at each other? Does it actually illuminate the underlying article in any way? It does sometimes. I mean, I think you can see when you read discussions about Trayvon Martin, you can see how deep this stuff goes. Like how deep these rifts are in society. Like I didn't realize that racism was still really a big deal for a lot of people. Not that it was a solved problem, but it's deep, man. So some of these discussions can be good. So I think the existing tool set works really, really well, but you do need moderators. So Discourse is designed to be community moderated, but it really helps when you have good moderators. I mean, just because you have good community moderation doesn't mean all your moderators need to go take a vacation, right? Having a moderator step in and say, look, keep it civil, I know everybody has strong opinions, but let's stay on track here, works wonders, right? So I think the more you do stuff that's really controversial, that's news, the more you need active moderation in addition to the community stuff, because it's leadership, man. There's no substitute for good leadership. So I think that would be my guidance there, is the more you do that, the more you need really a team of real moderators to assist the community in figuring this stuff out.
One last question.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm curious about the rule formations, because it seems like the rules, especially for Stack Overflow, are kind of like the pillars that really make everything work. So I was curious as to whether those rules that you developed were all kind of done a priori in discussions you had with people before the tool was developed, or a lot of them came as you were developing the product and as you were seeing the product in use and how communities were developing from that.
Well, we did a lot of research, as I mentioned in an earlier answer. So we researched it, and I thought about, okay, here are the problem sets. Here's all the existing, and I've talked about stuff on my blog that's related for a long time. So I have certain plans of things that I've seen to be working in other engines, and I sort of built a Frankenstein monster of, I see this is working, I see this is working, I see that is not working, I'm going to leave that on the operating table, and I see this brain is working. So I plug all those things in, and then you really do have to see what happens. No plan survives contact with the enemy, right? So certain aspects of it work and don't work, and you tweak it. But I think having done the homework, done the research of things that were working, and understanding the behaviors I wanted to get, and the things that I thought were useful in incentivizing those behaviors, folding those in initially was very, very helpful, because you're just closer to getting it right than someone who just throws something out there. Because you've done your homework, right? Like I've built a Frankenstein monster that I think represents the best stuff for the behaviors that I want. I had a plan, and I had done the research. And then you still iterate. I mean, there's so many things with communities where it's hard to predict just how strict they became at Stack Overflow because of the reputation system. Because when you see a programmer getting 1,000 reputation from posting an XKCD cartoon, you get angry. And you're like, you know what? These XKCD cartoons are bullshit. We should not allow these, right? And I think that's the correct impulse, but I didn't understand how deep that would go. And all the ramifications of having reputation built into the system caused people to get really strict about what they would accept. And I think they were right. The community was right about this, for the record. I'm not saying they were wrong, but they saw it before I did, that we need to be much more stricter in what we accept. Because I want this to be about real programming and code, not conversations and cartoons and funny things. So yeah, it's sort of a combination of doing your research and then iterating. Yeah. Okay. Thanks.